Welcome to the hunt, because this ordinary-looking Roosevelt dime may be hiding the kind of rare, detail-serious collectors know to look for. Let's take a closer look and uncover what makes certain examples truly stand out. First, coin. Modern Roosevelt dime can look almost completely ordinary at first glance, yet under magnification, a tiny raised area near the lettering or rim can transform the way a collector studies the entire coin. That is what makes this 2021 Roosevelt dime so interesting. The potential die chip and related error characteristics are not dramatic enough to announce themselves from across the room, but they can become significant when their shape, position, and origin are properly understood. The Philadelphia mint mark identifies where this dime was struck, while the small irregularity near the lettering or rim raises a much more important question. Are we looking at a genuine mint-made die characteristic, an actual striking error, or simply post-mint damage? That distinction is the heart of this coin's story. Later, we will examine what authenticated examples of the regular 2021 dime have actually brought in the marketplace, what exceptional pieces have sold for, and which combination of grade, strike, variety, and error attribution can move a modern 10-cent coin far beyond its face value. The story begins with the Roosevelt dime itself, a denomination introduced in 1946 to honor Franklin Delano Roosevelt, whose legacy was closely connected with the March of Dimes and the national fight against polio. By 2021, the design had been in continuous production for 3/4 of a century, making the coin a fascinating bridge between American history and modern, everyday commerce. The obverse carries Roosevelt's portrait, with Liberty along the left side, In God We Trust near the lower left portion of the portrait, and the date at the right. The reverse presents the traditional torch of liberty between olive and oak branches, surrounded by United States of America, EPLUIBUSUNUM, and one dime. John R. Sinek designed both sides of the original Roosevelt dime, and his work established a visual identity that has survived through enormous changes in American society, technology, and coin production. The 2021 issue belongs to the modern copper-nickel era rather than the earlier silver era. It weighs approximately 2.27 grams, measures about 17.9 millimeters across, and uses a clad construction consisting of a copper core bonded to outer layers of copper-nickel. Its reeded edge is another useful diagnostic feature because authentic production characteristics should remain consistent around the circumference unless a genuine mint error has altered them. The letter P is especially important because it tells us that this dime originated at the Philadelphia Mint, one of the United States Mint's principal production facilities. The 2021 Philadelphia issue was not a scarce coin by ordinary mintage standards. Published numismatic references report a circulating production figure of roughly 1.35 billion pieces for the year, which immediately explains why the normal example is generally worth little more than its face value in circulated condition. That enormous production figure is actually part of what makes the error question more intriguing. When hundreds of millions of coins pass through presses, planchets, dies, counting equipment, bags, rolls, and distribution channels, even a very small percentage of abnormal pieces can become collectible. But rarity cannot simply be assumed because a coin looks unusual. A tiny raised bump near a letter, for example, may represent a die chip, while a depression could indicate a struck-through event, and a flattened rim might result from a broad strike or another striking-related problem. The physical position of the feature matters, as does whether it repeats on other examples struck from the same die. A genuine die chip is created when a small portion of a working die breaks away, leaving a raised shape on the coins struck afterward. That is fundamentally different from damage that happens after the coin leaves the mint. This is where the 2021 dime becomes particularly valuable as a lesson in numismatic investigation. A collector examining a suspected die chip near lettering should first study the feature under strong magnification and good neutral lighting. The raised area should be compared with the surrounding design, looking for characteristics consistent with metal flowing into a damaged portion of the die. If the feature sits beside a letter or touches the rim, its exact relationship to the design becomes critical. A die chip can create an extra blob of metal, an unusual extension, or a raised, irregular shape that remains remarkably consistent from coin to coin. By contrast, a scratch, gouge, or contact mark normally removes or displaces metal and tends to produce a different texture. The rim deserves special attention because modern clad dimes can experience several forms of striking abnormalities, including broad strikes, partial collar errors, missing clad layers, and other problems that affect the edge or perimeter. There are documented marketplace listings for 2021 P dimes described as having die chips, missing clad and broad-struck characteristics, but individual online listings are not automatically equivalent to professionally authenticated auction records. That distinction is essential. A seller's description can identify a possibility, but authentication requires objective examination. Once condition enters the picture, the ordinary 2021 P dime and the exceptional 2021 P dime begin to separate dramatically. NGC's current guide places ordinary examples at modest values, even into high mint state grades, illustrating just how common the basic issue remains. PCGS population data also shows that certified examples exist in high grades, including pieces designated full bands, with the population changing as more coins are submitted and attributed. Full bands, or FB, refers to the horizontal bands across the torch, on the reverse being sharply and completely defined, a characteristic that can create a premium in high-grade Roosevelt dimes. PCGS records an MS68 FB example selling for $97.99 in a 2022 eBay auction, while an ordinary MS69 example has a recorded auction price of $335. These figures demonstrate an important principle. Even without a spectacular error, condition rarity can make a modern coin substantially more interesting than its face value. At the same time, they also show why a collector should be cautious about assigning a four-figure value to a normal specimen. A hypothetical certified 2021 P with an unusually important, independently verified die variety or major mint error could potentially move into a much higher valuation range, perhaps around $1,240 or more if multiple rarity factors converge, but that would require evidence, not simply an attractive-looking bump. The grading process becomes even more important when evaluating such a coin, because modern mint state pieces can look nearly identical to the unaided eye while receiving very different grades. A coin graded MS60 has no wear from circulation but can show significant marks, while coins progressing through MS61, MS62, MS63, MS64, MS65, MS66, MS67, and higher levels must meet increasingly demanding standards for surface preservation, luster, strike, and eye appeal. At the upper end, a single contact mark across Roosevelt's cheek or an abrasion in a prominent field can prevent a coin from reaching the highest grade. The reverse torch is equally important for collectors seeking full bands, because incomplete or weak separation across the horizontal bands can prevent the FB designation. Color is less complicated on a copper-nickel dime than on copper cents, but original mint luster, brightness, tunning, discoloration, and environmental staining still affect appearance and marketability. A suspected error should never be cleaned in an attempt to make it more visible. Polishing, dipping, scraping, or aggressive rubbing can permanently alter the surfaces and potentially destroy the very evidence a professional wants to examine. If the suspected die chip is convincing, photographs should be taken before any handling, and the coin should be stored in an inert holder or protective flip, rather than loose with other coins. The most important question is how a collector separates an interesting anomaly from a truly valuable mint error. Authentication begins with the coin's physical specifications, including weight, diameter, edge, metal composition, and overall design characteristics. A scale accurate to at least 1/100th of a gram can be useful for screening, although weight alone cannot prove an error. Magnification should then be used to document the suspected feature from multiple angles. The next step is comparison. If several coins show the identical raised formation in precisely the same location, that can strongly support a direlated explanation. If the abnormality appears only on one coin, other possibilities must be considered, including a one-off striking problem or damage that occurred after production. Professional grading services such as PCGS and NGC provide authentication, grading, encapsulation, and population information that can help establish credibility. PCGS specifically catalogs the 2021 P-Dime in both regular and full bands categories and tracks related die and release designations. This is also where counterfeit awareness becomes relevant. A modern dime is inexpensive enough that counterfeiting may seem irrational, but altered coins, artificial damage, and exaggerated error descriptions can still mislead inexperienced buyers. A collector should therefore distinguish between a verified mint-made anomaly, a recognized variety, an unusual but minor die characteristic, and damage created outside the mint. That brings the 2021 P. Roosevelt dime back to the central issue: rarity versus appearance. A normal circulated example from this enormous production run is not automatically rare, and even a brilliant uncirculated coin does not become a four-figure rarity simply because it carries a Philadelphia mint mark. The market rewards evidence. A minor die chip near lettering may attract specialists, especially if it is distinctive, repeatable, and connected to a known die state, but a dramatic and clearly authenticated mint error would command much stronger attention. As a realistic illustration, a certified example with an unusually high grade, exceptional full bands, and a documented major mint-made error might enter a completely different market category, with a hypothetical collector valuation around $2,175 to $3,100, depending on the exact error, certification, population, and demand. An even more dramatic, independently authenticated error could theoretically bring more, but such a result should never be treated as a guaranteed value for every coin showing a similar mark. Preservation is equally important. Keep the dime away from PVC-containing materials, moisture, abrasive surfaces, and unnecessary handling, and hold it by the edges when inspection is necessary. Auction results, dealer offers, population reports, and current collector demand can all change over time, so the strongest valuation comes from comparing genuinely comparable, authenticated pieces rather than relying on a single online asking price. The fascinating lesson of the 2021 P. Roosevelt dime is that modern coin collecting is often less about finding an obviously rare date and more about recognizing the tiny production clues hidden in ordinary money. This issue had a huge mintage, yet individual coins can separate themselves through exceptional preservation, full bands, unusual die states, or genuine mint errors. Current certified market records make that clear. PCGS reports an auction record of $335 for an MS69 regular strike example, while the recorded MS68 FB result is far lower, demonstrating that the premium attached to any particular coin depends heavily on grade, designation, and market timing. A genuinely extraordinary authenticated error could command a substantially larger figure, potentially around $3,760 in a specialized market scenario. But that kind of valuation belongs only to a coin whose error is proven, significant, and desirable to collectors. The tiny die chip or rim anomaly that started this investigation, therefore, should not be viewed as an automatic jackpot. It should be treated as evidence worth studying. The real value lies in understanding exactly what happened during production, determining whether the feature is mint-made, documenting how consistently it appears, establishing the coin's grade and originality, and then comparing it with verified examples. That combination of careful observation, historical knowledge, technical authentication, and market evidence is what turns a seemingly ordinary 10-cent piece into a serious numismatic investigation. Next coin, a 1982 D. Roosevelt dime, can disappear into a handful of ordinary change without attracting a second glance. Yet this particular issue occupies an interesting place in modern American numismatics because the year, mint, condition, and production characteristics can dramatically change how collectors evaluate an otherwise familiar 10-cent piece. Struck at the Denver Mint during a period when the United States was dealing with recession, high interest rates, and major changes in the nation's economy, the coin represents far more than a small piece of spending money. Its Denver Mint mark identifies its place of manufacture, while its surfaces can preserve clues about how carefully it was struck, transporting, and handled over the decades. For collectors, the real mystery is not simply whether 1982 D-dime is old enough to be interesting, because it is not particularly old by American coinage standards. The more important questions concern scarcity in exceptional condition, strike quality, recognized varieties, genuine mint errors, and the enormous difference between a common circulated survivor and a coin that remained remarkably well preserved. As we move deeper into the story, those distinctions will become increasingly important, and later we will examine the factors that determine collector value and what authenticated examples have actually achieved in the marketplace. The Roosevelt dime itself carries a history that reaches back to one of the most consequential American presidents of the 20th century. Franklin Delano Roosevelt died in 1945 after leading the nation through the Great Depression and most of World War II, and the United States Mint quickly prepared a new dime bearing his portrait. The connection was especially meaningful because Roosevelt had supported the March of Dimes, an organization that helped finance the fight against polio, the disease that had affected him personally. The first Roosevelt dimes appeared in 1946, and the design created by chief engraver John R. Sinek remained in use when the 1982 D issue was produced. On the obverse, Roosevelt faces left, surrounded by liberty, in God we trust, and the date, with the small d mint mark indicating Denver. The reverse presents a torch between an olive branch and an oak branch, surrounded by United States of America, EPLUBUSUNUM, and one dime. The imagery is deliberate. The torch represents liberty, the olive branch traditionally suggests peace, and the oak branch symbolizes strength. By 1982, Americans had lived with this design for more than 3 decades, so the coin was not introduced as a commemorative novelty. It was a working denomination intended to circulate through stores, vending machines, banks, parking meters, and millions of ordinary transactions. The economic environment surrounding the coin adds another layer to its history. In 1982, the United States was emerging from a severe recession, with unemployment rising to levels that had not been seen in decades, while the Federal Reserve maintained a tight monetary policy in its effort to bring down the inflation that had troubled the country during the late 1970s and early 1980s. Mortgage rates were extraordinarily high, consumer confidence was under pressure, and American manufacturing was experiencing significant changes. Against that backdrop, a 10-cent coin might seem insignificant, but its very purpose reveals how closely coinage is connected to economic life. The 1982 D-dime was struck for commerce, not for collectors, and its immense production reflected the everyday need for small denomination money. The Denver Mint was one of the principal facilities producing circulating United States coinage, and the D-mint mark became an essential identifier for collectors. The issue's reported mintage was 1,719,487,500 pieces, placing it firmly in the category of abundant modern U.S. coinage rather than a classic rarity. That enormous number also explains an important contradiction. Millions of examples existed, yet truly exceptional survivors can still attract disproportionate attention. Once a coin has been heavily circulated, countless small scratches, contact marks, dulling, and environmental effects accumulate. The population of surviving pieces in genuinely superior condition is therefore much smaller than the original production figure suggests. Technically, the 1982 D. Roosevelt dime belongs to the copper-nickel clad era that began in the mid-1960s when the United States moved away from circulating silver dimes. The coin weighs approximately 2.27 grams and measures about 17.9 millimeters in diameter, with a reeded edge. Its construction consists of a copper core bonded to outer layers of copper-nickel alloy, giving the dime its familiar appearance while dramatically reducing the intrinsic metal value compared with the silver Roosevelt dimes of the earlier era. that composition also gives collectors useful authentication clues. A genuine example should have the expected dimensions, weight, edge structure, and general appearance, although normal production tolerances mean that a tiny difference on a consumer-grade scale does not automatically indicate an error. The manufacturing process involved preparing metal strip, punching planchets, upsetting their edges, annealing and cleaning the blanks, and then striking them between dies under substantial pressure. Each individual strike transferred the Roosevelt portrait and reverse design onto the planchet, while the reeded collar helped control the coin's diameter and edge formation. Modern high-speed production was designed to create enormous quantities of consistent coins, but dies gradually experienced wear, contact, polishing, and deterioration. Those production realities are central to understanding why collectors sometimes encounter doubled features, die chips, die cracks, strike weakness, or other abnormalities. Yet an unusual appearance must always be examined carefully before being described as an error. The caution becomes especially important when evaluating the 1982 D-dime for varieties and mint-made abnormalities. Collectors should first distinguish a genuine die variety from damage caused after the coin left the mint. A die chip normally appears as raised metal on the finished coin because a small piece of the die surface has broken away, allowing metal to fill the resulting depression during striking. A die crack can create a raised, irregular line, while a true double die variety involves a specific form of design duplication created during die production rather than ordinary machine doubling. Machine doubling can look dramatic under magnification, but generally does not carry the same numismatic significance as a recognized double die. The 1982 D issue is also known in the marketplace for coins associated with unusual strike characteristics, but individual claims require verification rather than assumption. A broad strike, off-center strike, clipped planchet. Missing clad layer or other genuine mint error can be collectible because the abnormality occurred during production, but damage inflicted by a counting machine, coin sorter, vise, pocket, or other object after striking is not the same thing. This is why serious collectors photograph suspicious areas, compare the coin with normal examples, inspect the edge, and use magnification before reaching a conclusion. If a supposed error is being offered for a large premium, independent authentication becomes particularly important because the financial incentive for exaggerating minor abnormalities is very real. Condition is where the ordinary 1982 D-dime begins to separate from the genuinely desirable pieces. A circulated example may show flattened high points on Roosevelt's portrait, hairlines, rim contact, scratches across the fields, and loss of original luster. A mint-state specimen, by contrast, must show no evidence of circulation wear, although it can still have marks acquired during the manufacturing, bagging, transportation, and storage process. Professional grading services evaluate characteristics such as surface preservation, strike, luster, eye appeal, and overall quality when assigning grades within the mint state range. MS-60 is the entry point for an uncirculated coin, while progressively higher grades represent increasingly demanding levels of preservation. At the upper end, tiny marks that would be irrelevant on a circulated dime can become decisive. Strike quality also matters because a coin can be technically uncirculated while still showing areas of weakness caused by die condition or striking pressure. Luster should remain original and natural rather than appearing artificially polished or chemically altered. Unlike copper cents, Roosevelt dimes do not normally receive the familiar red, red-brown, or brown color designations used for copper, but toning, discoloration, and surface originality still influence desirability. A high-grade coin with clean fields, sharp details, attractive original luster, and strong eye appeal can command a substantial premium over an ordinary example, even when both coins share exactly the same date and mint mark. The marketplace provides a useful lesson in just how sharply those differences can affect value. Because the 1982 D-dime had a production figure of more than 1.7 billion pieces, the vast majority of surviving examples remain inexpensive, and collectors should not assume that an ordinary circulated specimen is rare. The value discussion changes only when the coin possesses something that the market genuinely wants: exceptional grade, extraordinary preservation, a recognized variety, a major authenticated mint era, or a combination of these characteristics. For illustration, a hypothetical certified high-grade example with unusually strong surfaces and a desirable recognized attribution might enter a collector market around $1,180, while a substantially rarer authenticated era in superior condition could potentially move toward $2,460 or higher. Those are not claims that every 1982 D dime is worth such amounts. They represent the type of premium that can exist when rarity is independently established. I would not assign a fictional auction record to this issue where reliable evidence does not establish one. Instead, collectors should consult current auction archives, population reports, and recognized price guides and compare coins with the same grade and attribution. A seller's asking price is not an auction result, and an uncertified coin described as rare is not automatically a rare coin. The strongest evidence comes from an independently verified specimen whose characteristics can be documented and compared with known examples. Ultimately, the enduring appeal of the 1982 D. Roosevelt dime comes from the tension between abundance and condition rarity. More than 1 billion pieces were struck, yet decades of circulation, handling, storage, and environmental exposure have eliminated the pristine appearance of countless survivors. That makes preservation important from the moment a collector finds an interesting example. The coin should be handled by its edges, never rubbed with a cloth, polished, dipped unnecessarily, or scraped to reveal a suspected variety. A hard plastic holder or archival quality flip is preferable to loose storage, and materials containing PVC should be avoided because they can damage the surface over time. For authentication, weight, diameter, edge reads, metal appearance, die characteristics, and microscopic examination should all be considered together. If a potentially valuable variety or error is discovered, professional certification can provide the strongest foundation for a serious valuation. A hypothetical extraordinary 1982 D specimen combining a major authenticated mint era, unusually high grade, excellent eye appeal, and documented rarity could conceivably attract interest around $3,350 or more in the right market. But that possibility belongs to a highly specialized category and should never be confused with the value of a normal coin. The historical significance of the issue remains regardless of price. It captures America in 1982, preserves the enduring Roosevelt design, and demonstrates how modern mass-produced currency can develop specialized collecting niches. For the careful numismatist, that is the real lesson of the 1982 D dime. Its value is not created by the date and mint mark alone, but by the evidence hidden in the metal, its originality, preservation, production characteristics, rarity, authentication, and the willingness of informed collectors to compete for an example that genuinely stands apart from the millions that came before it. Last coin at first glance, the 1983 P. Roosevelt dime looks like exactly what it was intended to be, an ordinary 10-cent coin made for everyday American commerce. But place one beneath a strong light, rotate it slowly, and begin studying the fields, lettering, portrait, torch, and tiny details around the rim, and a much more interesting story emerges. Collectors pay unusually close attention to this particular issue because 1983 was a difficult year for obtaining pristine United States circulation coinage, and the best survivors can be dramatically harder to find than the enormous production number initially suggests. The Philadelphia mint mark, the quality of the strike, the preservation of the surfaces, and especially the sharpness of the reverse torch can separate an ordinary example from a genuinely desirable one. There is also an important lesson here about modern coins. Rarity does not always mean a low mintage. Sometimes the real scarcity develops after the coins are struck, when millions of pieces enter circulation and only a tiny fraction survive in exceptional condition. As we examine this dime more closely, we will trace its history from the Philadelphia Mint to the collecting market and determine what experienced numismatists look for before assigning importance to a specimen. By the later stages of the investigation, the reasons certain authenticated examples command impressive premiums, and why those prices should never be applied to every 1983 P dime, will become much clearer. The story begins with the Roosevelt dime itself, a denomination born from a deeply emotional moment in American history. Franklin Delano Roosevelt died on April 12, 1945, after serving as president through the Great Depression and most of World War II. His connection to the March of Dimes made the dime an especially appropriate denomination for his memorial. Roosevelt had personally experienced the effects of polio, and the organization that became known as the March of Dimes had helped raise money for research and treatment. The first Roosevelt dimes were released in 1946, carrying a portrait prepared by chief engraver John R. Sinek. Nearly 4 decades later, the same basic design remained on American currency. On the obverse, Roosevelt faces left, with liberty along the upper left side, in God we trust near the lower left portion, and the date positioned beneath the portrait. On a Philadelphia circulation strike from 1983, the P mint mark is visible to the right of the date, an important detail because Philadelphia had historically produced many U.S. coins without mint marks, but the mint began using the P on circulating coinage from Philadelphia in 1980. The reverse contains a torch between an olive branch and an oak branch, surrounded by United States of America, EPLUBUSUNUM, and 1 dime. Sinek's composition was designed to communicate liberty, peace, and strength, meaning the tiny coin in a collector's hand carries both presidential history and a carefully constructed national symbolism. Now look at the year itself. In 1983, the United States was still dealing with the consequences of a serious recession, while inflation was falling from the extreme levels experienced earlier in the decade. Interest rates remained historically high, unemployment was elevated, and the American economy was undergoing major structural changes. At the same time, the nation was preparing for the 1984 Los Angeles Olympic Games, an event that influenced the mint's priorities and eventually contributed to an unusual circumstance for collectors. According to PCGS research, the United States Mint did not issue its normal annual uncirculated mint sets for 1983, continuing a hiatus that had begun the previous year as the mint dealt with major numismatic and production demands. That detail matters enormously when studying the 1983 P dime because collectors did not have the usual convenient source of government-packaged uncirculated examples. Instead, pristine pieces had to be found through other channels, including rolls, bags, dealers, and circulation searches. The Philadelphia Mint produced 647,025,000 examples of the 1983 P Roosevelt dime, a figure that sounds enormous, and it is, but mintage alone does not tell the entire story. PCGS specifically notes that high-quality, sharply struck 1983 P dimes are remarkably difficult to locate today, while its population records show how few certified examples have received the coveted full bands designation. This is the point where an ordinary-looking dime begins to become an investigation into condition rarity. Before deciding whether a specimen deserves serious attention, however, an experienced collector establishes what the coin is supposed to be physically. The 1983 P Roosevelt dime is a copper-nickel-clad coin with outer layers containing 75% copper and 25% nickel, bonded over a pure copper center. It weighs approximately 2.27 grams, measures about 17.9 millimeters in diameter, and has a reeded edge. Those measurements provide a useful first layer of authentication, but they are not enough by themselves to prove a coin genuine or to establish an error. The manufacturing process begins with metal strip that is prepared to the required thickness, from which blanks are punched and subsequently processed before striking. The planchets are formed with an upset rim and then fed into high-speed coining presses, where obverse and reverse dies transfer the design under enormous pressure. The collar controls the planchet during striking and helps create the finished diameter and edge. Every stage introduces opportunities for small variations, die wear, mechanical problems, and accidental abnormalities. That is why collectors should never assume that a strange-looking mark is automatically a mint error. A raised line can be associated with a die crack, an isolated blob may represent a die chip, and apparent doubling can result from mechanical doubling rather than a true double die variety. Post-mint damage can imitate all of these characteristics. Scratches, dents, machine marks, rim impacts, and environmental damage can occur long after the coin leaves the mint. The safest approach is to examine the feature under magnification, determine whether the metal is raised or recessed, study its relationship to the surrounding design, and compare it against known die characteristics before assigning a numismatic explanation. The most revealing area on this issue may be the reverse torch. For Roosevelt dime specialists, sharp separation of the horizontal bands crossing the torch can make an enormous difference. PCGS catalogs the 1983P in both the regular strike category and the full bands category, and its current population information shows a striking contrast. Hundreds of examples have been certified in the regular category, while the reported PCGS population for the 1983P full bands designation is only 9 pieces in the cited report. Population reports are not perfect measures of the total number of coins that exist because the same coin can be resubmitted, different grading services maintain separate populations, and many valuable coins remain uncertified. Nevertheless, they provide useful evidence about how difficult a particular grade or designation has been to obtain. This is why two coins with identical dates and mint marks can live in completely different collecting worlds. One may have been pulled from circulation decades ago and accumulated hairlines, rim hits, and dull surfaces. Another may have remained untouched in an old roll, retaining bright original mint luster and unusually sharp design detail. When collectors evaluate mint state coins, professional grading considers factors including preservation, strike, luster, and overall eye appeal. MS60 is the beginning of the mint state range, but climbing through MS63, MS64, MS65, MS66, MS67, and beyond requires increasingly demanding surface quality. On a modern dime, tiny contact marks that would be ignored on a circulated specimen can prevent an otherwise beautiful coin from reaching the highest grades. Color classifications such as red, red-brown, and brown do not apply to Roosevelt dimes in the way they apply to copper cents, but natural tunning, original luster, discoloration, and surface originality remain important. A coin that has been polished may look bright, but can be far less desirable than one retaining untouched mint surfaces. And this is where documented auction history gives us something more reliable than speculation. PCGS records an auction result of $611 for a 1983P regular strike Roosevelt dime graded MS69, sold through eBay in September 2023. That result is noteworthy because MS69 represents an exceptionally high level of preservation, but it does not mean an ordinary 1983P dime is remotely comparable. The much more dramatic benchmark comes from a certified 1983P with the full bands designation. PCGS records an auction result of $2,232.50 for an MS68 FB example sold by Heritage Auctions on December 3, 2015. Heritage's own archive confirms the same sale, identifying the coin as an NGC MS68 full torch specimen. That verified result explains why specialists sometimes speak about the 1983P with unusual enthusiasm. The premium was not created by the date alone. It came from an exceptional combination of certification, grade, strike quality, and full bands detail. A figure above $2,000, therefore, belongs to a very specific population of exceptional coins, not to the hundreds of millions originally struck. PCGS's current guide also shows that a certified MS67 regular strike example can carry a much smaller but still meaningful premium, illustrating how dramatically the market changes as grade and quality change. There is no responsible reason to invent additional four-figure auction values simply to make the story more exciting. The documented MS68 FB result is the important evidence, and it teaches a broader principle. Collector markets reward measurable rarity, not dramatic descriptions. Authentication becomes especially important when a coin appears to have an unusual variety or mint-made error. The first step is always to establish that the coin itself matches the expected specifications. The weight should be close to the normal standard, the diameter should be appropriate, and the reeded edge should have the correct appearance. Next comes the visual examination. Look at the date and mint mark first, then inspect the portrait, lettering, fields, rim, and reverse torch. Genuine die variety should have characteristics created by the die itself, while a post-mint alteration generally shows evidence of impact, abrasion, cutting, or metal displacement inconsistent with the original striking process. Collectors should be particularly skeptical of dramatic-looking errors advertised without professional attribution. A missing section of design can have several possible causes, and a strange rim may reflect damage rather than a collar-related striking error. Counterfeiters can also alter inexpensive coins to imitate valuable varieties, so provenance and certification become increasingly important as the claimed value rises. For a potentially significant specimen, submitting the coin to a respected professional grading service provides a much stronger foundation than relying on a seller's description or a photograph posted online. The same principle applies to varieties. Not every apparent doubled letter, distorted digit, or unusual mint mark is a recognized variety. The 1983 P circulation strike should also not be confused with the famous 1983 No-S proof dime. That is a separate San Francisco proof issue, and PCGS identifies the 1983 No-S proof as a distinct variety with its own documented auction history. Confusing the two can lead to wildly incorrect expectations, which is precisely why identifying the coin correctly must come before discussing value. The final examination is therefore not really about asking whether every 1983 P Roosevelt dime is valuable. The evidence clearly says it is not. It is about discovering whether the particular coin in front of you belongs to the ordinary population or the much smaller group that collectors actively pursue. A circulated example remains primarily a historic piece of American pocket change, while a sharply preserved mint state specimen can become increasingly interesting as its grade rises. A top-grade coin with exceptional eye appeal is valuable because so few examples combine all those qualities, and a genuine full-band specimen can be dramatically more desirable because the sharp torch detail was difficult to obtain on this issue. PCGS's published information emphasizes the unusual scarcity of sharply struck 1983 P dimes, and its current population report records only a handful of full bands examples compared with the much larger regular strike population. For collectors preserving one, the safest method is simple. Handle it by the edges, avoid rubbing or polishing, keep it away from PVC-containing materials and excessive humidity, and use an inert holder designed for long-term coin storage. If an unusual feature appears, photograph it before cleaning or attempting any alteration, because originality is evidence. The long-term importance of the 1983 P Roosevelt dime lies in this remarkable contradiction. 647 million plus was struck, yet the best surviving examples became scarce enough to generate serious competition. Its story connects Franklin Roosevelt's legacy, the economics of early 1980s America, the manufacturing realities of the Philadelphia Mint, the temporary absence of official mint sets, and the specialized world of modern condition rarity. The documented $2,232.50 full bands auction result proves that exceptional examples can command substantial sums, but it also establishes the boundary that responsible numismatics must respect: authentication, grade. Strike originality, rarity, eye appeal, and genuine collector demand determine the value, not simply the words 1983 P Roosevelt dime on a label.